It was the fall of 1968 when I first learned how easy it is to mistake silence for peace. We were newly married in a narrow duplex off a two-lane road, the kind of place where the furnace kicked on like a cough and the windows sweated in the mornings. I came home from my job at the plant with my lunch pail still smelling of metal and coffee, and she met me at the door with flour on her hands and her hair pinned back the way her mother taught her. Supper would be warming and the radio would be low, and I would feel like I'd landed in the safest place on earth. Back then, I believed that as long as we didn't yell, we were doing fine. I'd grown up in a house where anger came through the walls like radio static, and I promised myself I'd never build that kind of home. So I became the kind of man who swallowed the sharp parts of a day. If something bothered me, I'd fix a hinge, mow the yard, change the oil, and let the work speak for me. She didn't raise her voice either. She smoothed things over with a smile, moved the dishes, folded the towels, and kept the edges of life tidy. On Saturday nights, we'd sit on the couch with the television low and our knees almost touching. Sometimes she'd rest her head on my shoulder, and I'd feel like I'd done something noble just by being steady. She'd like to tell me stories from her shift at the diner, and I'd listen, half laughing, half tired, thinking that listening was the same as knowing her. If she asked what I was thinking, I'd say, "Nothing much," and I meant it the way a young man means it when he's proud of being uncomplicated. When she went quiet after a phone call with her sister, I assumed it would pass. When she lingered at the kitchen table after I'd gone to bed, I assumed she was just winding down. Now, looking back, I can see those were the first tiny choices that taught us to live side by side instead of face to face. We didn't fight, but we also didn't reach for the truth when it was small enough to hold. We treated discomfort like a loose thread. Tuck it in and hope it disappears. I didn't understand then that the things you don't say don't vanish. They settle layer by layer until one day you can't remember what the air felt like before it got heavy. That winter, I took a promotion that meant longer hours and a different shift. I told myself I was doing it for us, for the future we kept promising each other. She nodded and said she understood, and I took that nod as approval instead of a quiet goodbye to the evenings we used to share. The first week on the new schedule, I walked out before sunrise and came home after dark, and I didn't notice how quickly "we" started sounding like "me." On my first week of the new shift, I remember standing in the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning, tying my boots while the rest of the duplex slept. The only light was over the sink, and it made the linoleum look pale and tired. She came in wrapped in my old sweatshirt, eyes half open, and poured coffee without a word. I kissed her cheek, told her I'd be home in time for supper, and she nodded like a clerk stamping a form. At the time, I took that nod as proof we were solid. I believed steadiness was love, and love was mostly about not making trouble. Then our first baby came, and time stopped belonging to either of us. I can still see her in the hospital room, hair damp at the temples, holding that small bundle like it was made of glass. I stood beside the bed, scared out of my mind, and when the nurse showed me how to cradle him, my hand shook like I was holding a live wire. I believed then that our family would pull us closer. I told myself shared responsibility would automatically mean shared closeness. I didn't understand that responsibility can become a wall if you never talk through it together. The weeks that followed were all schedules and whispers. I'd come home after dark, wash up at the sink so I wouldn't wake the baby, and find her in the rocker with her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. I'd ask if she was okay, and she'd say, just tired of do surds. And I'd let that be the end of it. I thought I was being kind by not pushing. I thought I was protecting her from more questions when she already had too many demands. Now I can hear what I missed. She wasn't asking for a plan. She was asking to be seen while she was still standing in the middle of it. When money got tight, I took overtime without telling her first because it felt simpler that way. I'd leave a note on the counter and call it communication. She started keeping her own small list of errands and doctor appointments, and I stopped knowing the names of the women she sat with at the pediatrician's office. We didn't argue about it. We just divided the world into her side and mine, neatly, like drawers. The first real sign came one evening when I walked in and saw a casserole cooling on the counter and her coat already on. She said her sister had called and needed help, and she'd be back later. I stood there holding my lunch pail and felt oddly relieved because it meant I didn't have to talk. That's what I believed then. Quiet was relief. Now I know relief is not the same as connection. A few months later, we signed papers for a small house farther from town, and I told myself the extra space would make us feel close again. The house we bought sat at the edge of a new subdivision where the trees were thin and the lawns looked like promises. The first night we slept there, our son's crib was still in the corner of our bedroom because the other rooms were full of boxes. She lay awake, listening to the refrigerator hum, and I lay awake thinking about the mortgage. In the morning, I drove to work before the sun cleared the rooftops, and when I came home, the streetlights were already on. I told myself it was a temporary season and that we would find our way back when life slowed down. With the second baby, the days turned into a procession of small tasks that never ended. She kept the calendar, I kept the paychecks, and we both acted like that division was maturity. I could tell you exactly when the trash went out and which nights the kids needed baths, but I couldn't tell you what she was afraid of. She could tell you what shift I was on and when my lunch break landed, but she couldn't tell you what I wanted besides rest. We didn't fight about any of it. We ran the house like two managers handing off shifts. One summer afternoon, I came home early and found her at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand, staring at the wall. The kids were napping, and the whole house felt suspended, as if it were holding its breath. I asked who she'd been talking to, and she said, no one, even though the cord was still warm from her palm. I believed then that it was none of my business if she didn't offer it. I believed privacy was respect. Now I see it was the first time she tested whether I'd come closer or let the moment pass. We began to speak in shorthand. Did you pay the gas bill? Can you pick up milk? He has practice at 6. Our conversations worked, but they didn't reach. I thought I was being steady again. I didn't notice how she stopped bringing those things up because she stopped expecting me to understand. The moment that sticks with me is a birthday party at the park with paper plates and cake. She was laughing with the other mothers, and I stood by the grill turning hot dogs, proud that I was providing a simple good day. When she walked past me, she brushed my arm and didn't look up. It wasn't cold exactly, it was unfamiliar, like passing a coworker in the hallway. I believed then that long marriages naturally settle into routine. Now I know routine can be a gentle thing or it can be a slow kind of leaving. That fall, she signed up for an evening class at the community college, something in bookkeeping that she said would keep her brain awake. I smiled and said I was glad, but inside I felt a quiet irritation I couldn't name. Instead of asking what she wanted for herself, I added another overtime shift and told myself I was being supportive. That's how the next part started. Her life opening outward while mine narrowed to work and sleep. By the time the kids hit their teenage years, the house sounded different. Doors closed harder. Music leaked under bedroom walls, and the phone rang more than it used to. On school nights, we'd sit at the kitchen table with homework spread out and permission slips stacked under a coffee mug. She would read over a report card with her lips pressed tight, and I would watch the clock, thinking about dawn. I believed then that raising kids was the main job of a marriage, and that whatever was missing between us could wait. We didn't fight with each other. We fought the days. When our son got caught sneaking out, we stood together in the hallway, shoulders squared, delivering consequences like we'd rehearsed them. When our daughter cried over a boy who didn't call back, she went to her mother first, and I lingered at the doorway, unsure what I was allowed to say. We worked well as parents. We could finish each other's instructions. We could not finish each other's thoughts. Late at night, after the kids were in bed, she would sit with bills and a yellow legal pad, adding numbers, crossing them out, starting again. I would sit in my chair with the newspaper, pretending to read the same paragraph twice. Sometimes she would begin a sentence and stop, as if she'd forgotten why she started. I believed then that if she really needed something, she'd say it plainly. I believe people asked for what they wanted. Now I know some people stop asking when the cost of asking feels too high, and they learn to live without being heard. The clearest moment came on the night of her graduation from that bookkeeping program. The ceremony was in a high school gym, and I arrived late because the supervisor had asked me to cover an unexpected shift. I slipped into the bleachers while names were being called, scanning the row of faces in caps and gowns until I found her. When she walked across the stage, she looked out and didn't see me. I clapped anyway, trying to erase the missing hour. On the drive home, she held the certificate in her lap and stared out the window at the streetlights. I said I was proud of her, and she said, "Thank you." Like a woman accepting a compliment from a neighbor, I believed then that pride was enough, that a life built on duty would eventually feel like love again. Now, I understand that duty can build a house, but it can't build a room where two people actually meet. A few weeks later, she asked if I minded if she took a part-time job at the credit union in town. She said it would help with college savings and give her something of her own. I said I didn't mind, and I meant it, but I didn't ask what it felt like to step into a new life at 40. She started coming home with stories about coworkers and customers, and I found myself outside of them, nodding where I thought I should. Not long after, our oldest began counting the days to college, and the house started practicing its emptiness. Segment 5. The silence got bigger when the kids left. Word count 528. Character count 2,914. The day we dropped our oldest off at college, the campus was bright with late summer heat, and the air smelled like cut grass and new books. We carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs, sweating through our shirts, smiling at strangers as if we were part of something hopeful. In the dorm room, she fussed with the sheets, smoothing them tight. When it was time to leave, our son hugged his mother longer than he hugged me. I told myself that was natural. I believed then that when the kids started their own lives, we would finally have time to return to ours. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet I once took pride in. She looked out the window, tracing the highway signs with her eyes, and I kept both hands on the wheel, like a man trying to prove he still had control. I believed then that we were just tired, that the adjustment would settle. Now I can see we were facing each other again for the first time in years, and we didn't recognize what we saw. With one kid gone and the other close behind, the house exposed things we'd been able to ignore. The evenings were suddenly wide, and we filled them with small noise. The television, the dishwasher, the weather report. She started going for walks after supper, just around the neighborhood, and I stayed in my chair telling myself she deserved her time. The truth is, I didn't know how to join her without feeling awkward. I believed then that giving space was respectful. Now I know space can also be a way of avoiding a conversation you don't know how to start. For our anniversary that year, she suggested we take a weekend trip to a lake cabin her coworker had recommended. I agreed, thinking a change of scenery would do what routine could not. The cabin was simple, pine boards and a little porch, and at night the water went black and still. We ate dinner at a small restaurant where the waitress called us "you two" with a smile that felt like it belonged to another couple. Across the table, her hands rested in her lap, and mine rested beside my plate. We talked about the menu and the drive and the weather, and nothing else arrived. I believed then that the words would come if we waited long enough. Now I understand that waiting can become a habit, and habits don't notice when they turn into years. On the last morning, she sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and said calmly that she'd been thinking about separate bedrooms when we got home. She didn't say it like a threat, and she didn't say it like a punishment. She said it like a woman naming a practical solution. I nodded because nodding was what I knew how to do, and because arguing felt pointless when there was no anger to fight. When we pulled into our driveway that afternoon, the house looked the same as always, but I knew we were about to live in different corners of it. Segment 6: Leaving Without Slamming a Door. That night I lay in bed listening for her door as if it could tell me how she felt. I fell asleep telling myself it was temporary. Word count 507. Character count 2,839. Separate bedrooms happened the way most of our changes happened, quietly with small practical steps. The first night she carried her pillow down the hall, she said it would help her sleep because I snored, and that was true as far as it went. I watched her make the guest room bed like she was preparing it for someone important, smoothing the corners and setting a book on the nightstand. I believed then that if we could just get rest, we could get back to normal. Now I can see we were treating distance like a sleep problem, something you can solve by moving furniture and pretending the air will change. In the mornings, we still met in the kitchen. She made coffee, I read the paper, and we exchanged information like coworkers. Your mother called. The water bill came. The car needs an oil change. We were polite and careful, as if one wrong word might spill something we didn't know how to clean up. I believed we were being mature. Now I understand we were rehearsing how to live without each other. After the kids were gone, there was less to manage together, and that exposed how little was left. She began spending more evenings out with people from work, and I told her to go and have fun because that sounded supportive. The truth is, I didn't know how to follow her into a life that didn't include the old roles. I believed then that giving her space was generosity. Now I know it was also surrender. The conversation that changed everything happened on an ordinary Tuesday in March. I came home and found her sitting at the dining table with a notebook open, numbers in neat columns the way she wrote grocery lists. She told me she'd been looking at apartments, nothing fancy, just a small place closer to her job. She said she didn't want a scene and she didn't want to hurt anyone. She said she felt like she had been living beside herself for years and she was tired of it. I remember how my chest tightened, not with anger, but with a kind of delayed fear. Part of me wanted to argue, to drag the past out like evidence, but I couldn't find the words without turning them into blame. Another part of me felt relief, and that relief made me ashamed. I believed then that staying calm was respect, the way I'd always tried to be. Now I understand my calm had been avoidance, and it had trained us for this moment. That night, she began sorting a closet, folding sweaters into piles, setting aside things she didn't need. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no accusations, just the soft sound of hangers sliding on a rod. Standing in the hallway, I realized we'd finally reached the end of our quiet strategy. We had drifted so far that leaving was simply the next step, and the house began to empty in ways I could count. The day she moved out, the weather was clear and cold. Her brother backed a small rental truck into the driveway, and they carried boxes out in a steady rhythm. I stood by the front door, holding a roll of tape I didn't need, offering to help and being waved off gently. She moved through the rooms like a careful guest, checking drawers, lifting framed photos, deciding what belonged with her and what belonged with the past. I believed then that if we stayed polite, we could keep it from hurting. When the truck pulled away, the house didn't feel dramatic or tragic. It felt unfinished. I walked from room to room, noticing the small signs she was gone. Her side of the closet was an empty stretch of hangers. The bathroom had one toothbrush instead of two. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet and saw her favorite mug was gone. And that small missing thing hit me harder than the big events. I believed then that I would adjust quickly because I had always been good at adapting to whatever was in front of me. The first weeks alone were filled with odd little habits. I would set 2 plates on the table out of muscle memory and then stand there staring at them, just surprised. I ate dinner earlier and I realized how much of my life had been built around her presence, even when we weren't close. Now I can see how strange it is to miss a person you didn't really speak to. One afternoon in late April, I had a spell in the yard while I was trimming the hedges. The world went narrow and I had to sit down on the grass with my back against the fence. For a minute, I thought I could breathe it off the way I'd breathed off so many things. Then my left hand went clumsy and my heart began to pound. I believed then that I should handle it myself because that had always been my role. Instead, I called an ambulance. And in the noise of that ride, I found myself wanting to hear her voice. In the hospital, they called it a mild stroke, and the doctor said I was lucky I didn't ignore it longer. A nurse asked who to call, and I gave my son's number. Then my daughter's. After the doctor finished talking, my daughter asked if I wanted her to call her mother. I hesitated, and that hesitation told the truth I'd been dodging. I said yes. When she came in, she didn't cry or accuse. She sat beside the bed and adjusted the blanket at my feet, the way she used to when I was sick. Later, when the room emptied, she asked me how I'd been managing. I started with practical details, but my voice caught, and I surprised myself by telling her I'd been lonely. I believed then that saying that would start a fight. It didn't. She nodded and said she had been lonely too, even before she left. When she stood to go, she told me she'd come by the house later in the week to check on me. Segment 8. What I learned too late about no fight. Word count 540. Character count 2,898. She did come by later that week. It was a Thursday morning, and she let herself in the way she always had, calling my name so she wouldn't startle me. I was at the kitchen table with pill bottles lined up and a notepad where I'd tried to write down the doctor's instructions. She stood behind my chair and read the notes over my shoulder, then reached past me to correct one word. The touch was brief, familiar, and it made my throat tighten. I believed then that the marriage was over, and that fact had a weight I hadn't felt until then. After my follow-up appointment, she drove me to her apartment, a small place with sunlight in the living room and a plant on the windowsill that looked well cared for. She offered me tea, and I realized how much her life had moved on. We sat on her couch and spoke more honestly than we had in years because there was nothing left to protect. I told her I'd spent our marriage doing the things I knew how to do, hoping they would speak for what I couldn't say. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me quietly that she had waited for me to notice her, and that after a while she stopped, expecting it. She said she didn't leave because she hated me. She left because she felt herself disappearing in the space between my silence and my good intentions. Hearing it laid out that plainly, I felt the old urge to defend myself, to list every bill paid and every tire changed and every overtime shift taken. What I understood was that the ledger had never counted what she needed from me. In the months that followed, we found a strange new rhythm. We spoke on the phone about the kids, about the grandbaby's first steps, about my physical therapy appointments. Sometimes she'd bring over soup when the weather turned, and I'd hand her a container back the next week without making it complicated. I believed once that fine was the goal. Now, at this age, the truth I live with is quieter than any argument could have been. We didn't drift apart because of one betrayal or one ugly night. We drifted apart because every time something tender rose up between us, I treated it like something that would handle itself. I believed then that avoiding conflict meant I was keeping love safe. What I understand now is that love isn't kept safe by silence. It's kept alive by presence, by turning toward the small things while they are still small. Sometimes I sit in the same kitchen where I once tied my boots at 4:30 in the morning, and I can hear the old sounds if I let myself. The radio low, the pan on the stove, her footsteps on the hallway carpet. I don't rewrite the story into a tragedy, and I don't rewrite it into a victory. It is simply what happened when two good people mistook quiet for closeness. When I lock the door at night, I do it gently, and I think of how many doors we closed without ever noticing we were on opposite sides.